and welcome to the Business of Data podcast. I'm your host, Catherine King, and it's a pleasure to have you join us today. In this series, we'll be speaking to senior data analytics leaders to share their experiences, challenges, and insights. Let's go ahead and dive straight into today's episode. Hello and welcome to the Business of Data podcast. Today we are chatting all about communication and paradigm shifts in cyber intelligence, specifically how to continue effective communication from the executive board and how to work through departmental paradigm shifts to come out the other side as winners. Now, to do just that, I have brought in the lovely Sherene Jose, who is the VP and Chief of Staff for Mastercard. Now, if you haven't had the pleasure of meeting Sherene before, just a couple intro facts to get you up to speed with the lovely lady. Now, Sherene has been within Mastercard since September 2016, and as I say, she's now the Chief of Staff to the company's President of Cyber and Intelligence Solution Business. Now, Sherene has also spent time as a consultant working in a range of industries, including the financial services, retail, hospitality, airlines, media, as well as healthcare as well. Now, if you can't find her at the work desk, in pre-COVID times, you would have probably found her at the latest hot new restaurant with friends. But more recently in COVID times, she's been spending lots of time with her young family. Sherene, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on.
Super. Now, you've got two small children, is that right?
Yes, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old.
Fantastic. How's that been with 2020?
Gosh, I mean, crazy does not even start to describe it. I used to think that my, pre-COVID lifestyle was hectic and unmanageable, and how I used to wonder how I kept it together, and then 2020 happened. I had really designed my life pretty well in the pre-COVID era around having a good support structure, good network around me, built in lots of redundancy. Not only did I have the support of full-time nursery and school, we had a live there to do drop-offs and pickups, an Indian cook who came in weekly, a regular cleaner. Yeah, and then lockdown happened. Our au pair flew back to Spain. Our cleaner and cook stopped. And yeah, I have lots of horror stories about the sheer impossibility of trying to juggle full-time dual careers, full-time childcare for a 2-year-old, homeschooling a 5-year-old who still couldn't read instructions to follow anything, housework. My husband fell ill with COVID at one point. I mean, it was crazy. That's all.
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the best things about doing this podcast for me is it really humanizes the people from, we see lots of people join conferences and do their talks, but you never really get to find out much about them. And it's so interesting because seeing you today, you're all dressed up, you're looking fantastic for this podcast. And I could just imagine the mayhem that you have had to deal with. So thank you so much for giving me some of your time today. And as always, I always like to jump in with a nosy question first, because that's just how we do things on the Business of Data. So, should we jump into this conversation? Now, what's really fun for me is that you are the first ever Chief of Staff I've had on the pod. Now, we always want to make sure that we are as representative of all the departments and functions who touch the data analytics landscape. You don't just have to be a CDO to come and have a chit chat with me. So I'm so excited to have you here. So if you could start out, I'd love for you to tell me a little bit more about your role and what you get up to day to day.
Right. So this role, Chief of Staff, is originally from the military and the government, and it's a fairly new phenomenon for this role to, be a thing in private companies, and corporates have led the way in this, I'd say, because large corporates inherently tend to be very complex, and we live in an era of increasing complexity, and there was a bit of a recognition of the fact that someone needed to be there as a right-hand person and trusted advisor for the exec to watch out for their interests, their bandwidth, their stakeholder relationships, someone who's thinking about the how of their day-to-day. And the role itself can be hugely variable in its definition and remit. And I would advise anyone considering this role to do thorough research to know what they're getting into, because the role of Chief of Staff can vary massively, not just across sectors and industries, but even within the same company, depending on the dynamic between the person in this role and the exec that you're a chief of staff for. So in a sense, there's a lot of scope for bringing your personality to this role. So, I mean, broadly, I'd say, in the capacity of a trusted advisor for the exec, it can really vary what you do the day to day. There may be, it's a combination of a catch-all, doing things that are not clearly owned by people, but also a bit of a conduit. The chief of staff gets access to a lot of information and gets visibility into very senior level forums. And there is an element of being selective and sharing some of that insight with the right people in the business to ensure things get done. Right. And anything that is requested by the exec is both urgent and important. It is either for the CEO or the board or some senior customer stakeholders or investors and so on. So there's a huge element of continuously prioritizing and being agile in the role. So
and I can only imagine just constantly having to reshuffle this year. And imagine you thought you had a day planned and then something will come into the calendar and suddenly the entire day is redone for you.
Yes, exactly. And there's a huge element of communication in this role and messaging, crafting messages in the right way for the for internal forums. Like, when COVID happened, there were town halls with all staff every 2 weeks. And obviously we have a comms team, but I partner with them to ensure that the right messaging is put forward, the right people are brought to these forums, and my background in strategy consulting has helped me quite, because there's an element of how do we frame this discussion in a strategic manner, right? So it's an interesting role, and I would highly recommend those who want to sort of very quickly learn about their industry, their company, get a lot of visibility within their company to consider this role.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Now, obviously, communication is a big part of what we're going to chat about today. And I know when we were catching up previous to this episode, you did say that a large part of your role is providing that strategic narrative to the wider functions from the executive, in a way, almost a translator, and translating what's being said to the executive to the wider business. What's the most challenging aspect to that role? Because it's very, very important. So I'd imagine there's a fair few challenges attached to it as well.
Yeah. So as part of this role, I sit on the leadership team of the business. And a key part of my job is to just constantly be communicating across the breadth of the cyber intelligence organization in Mastercard. That could mean across different regions. Mastercard's a very global organization. Across different product leads, because we have different verticals even within this business, and also across functions, strategy, finance, legal, comms, marketing, what have you. And I'm involved quite closely in the process of crafting the business's strategic narrative, and that feeds into things like annual objectives for the business, quarterly CEO reviews, regular strategy updates to the board. But a lot of those discussions can seem quite theoretical unless it is broken down into something tangible that people can grasp and run with, right? So that is one of the things that I do as chief of staff, to break the strategic themes into clear actions and follow-ups that people can act on. It could be setting the agenda for leadership meetings. It could be ensuring that the right forums are set up for collaboration between teams within Mastercard to engender a better partnership. And then there's some sort of hard metrics that I design and then track to make sure that everyone's sort of keeping on track with agreed end goals. So there's an element of translating the strategic into the operational.
Absolutely.
And challenging, quite specific to that. So one aspect is that even in normal times, even sort of non-COVID times, this concept of a strategic narrative is not a static thing. It is a dynamic, ever-evolving thing. The market keeps changing. There are new announcements from competition and whatnot, and we have to keep pivoting, right? And so every time you feel like, okay, I've gone around the house, got everyone on the same page. Oh yeah, now it's time to start over. But also specific to COVID, so much of this role is predicated on having lots and lots of face-to-face access to the exec, and having those organic discussions which can give you insight into what are the top priorities for the exec of the business. Not having that face-to-face interaction means that I have to work doubly hard to be able to anticipate the exec needs.
Fantastic. I mean, just from this first 10 minutes of discussion, I think you're a great advertisement for anyone who's thinking about getting into this role. Is no day is the same, essentially. And if you like a varied life, then this could be the career choice for you. So just to round off this kind of section of our little chat here, I'm always keen in the Bob Pod to share advice so that our listeners and our audience can really take away things from our conversations. So I'm keen to know what advice you would give to other senior executives when it comes to making sure they have their fingers on the pulse of the organization's mood. I think it can be such, as you say, it changes from day to day. And I think it's so important, especially where we are right now, where some of us are still remote, some of us are heading back into the office. People are all over the place, really, if we think about all the various people who are going to be listening to this episode from basically all over the globe. So what would you recommend to ensuring that they do have their finger on the pulse of that organization's mood?
So I think one big learning clearly for everyone who, very quickly and abruptly had to go from working in an office to working remotely is, this realization that, gosh, we took a lot for granted, right? In terms of being able to sense the mood of the organization, being able to read the pulse of the organization, as you say. Just walking down the corridors of an office, you can catch fragments of conversation, read people's body language, and get a sense for, what people might be thinking and feeling. And now, in a remote working setup, a lot of our conversations tend to be a lot more agenda-based. It can come across a little bit transactional. Hey, I'm on this call because I need something from you, or you need something from me, rather than us just bumping into each other in the corridor and having a chat about the weather or a holiday. And therefore, it's very easy to lose sight of what the real pulse of the organization is. In terms of tips, I'd say start from an assumption that you have very little insight into what is really going on in people's heads, and be really, really open to input from various channels. And I'd caution senior people to from limiting their input only from the immediate directs, right? Often a lot of leadership people sit on leadership teams and only talk to other senior people. And it can be pretty hard because the workforce is a lot more diverse in terms of the different layers of the organization and their needs and so on. So I'd say if you're a senior organization, make some space in your diary to have like a 5-minute catch up with people at different levels of the organization. Be aware that actually there's a lot of filtering that happens, before information comes through to you, because no one wants to deliver bad news. No one wants to be the bearer of, be the messenger of bad news. So I think having someone like a chief of staff is really helpful in this context, because often people have more candid conversations with the chiefs of staff, and often that has been a very helpful tool, I think, for many execs. I personally have, regular one-to-one catch-ups with a lot of senior folks on the leadership team, and I've, been able to feedback sentiments in a way that doesn't, disclose anything confidential. And, I think starting from a point of not assuming anything is a good tip.
That's really interesting, actually. I love that soundbite. Don't assume anything. That's fantastic. Now, if that's not enough, if it's not enough that, half of the workforce or the majority of the workforce are now remote and all these things have changed, you've also experienced a rather big paradigm shift in the cyber and intelligence business as well. And I'm really keen, whilst I've got you, to have a bit of a chat about that, because I think it's definitely going to be something that the audience are going to be interested to hear about, what you've overcome in terms of challenges, the opportunities, and just the experience that you've had as well. So if you could start by outlining the paradigm shift that you have personally witnessed within the fraud department and what that has looked like in reality to you.
Yeah, so the history of the business that I'm in at Mastercard is quite interesting. It's a relatively newish part of Mastercard, only about 5-6 years old in a company that is over 50 years old. So to give you a bit of context, around 2014, our current CEO, Ajay Banga, who's stepping down at the end of this year, by the way, he had this sort of amazing insight. He saw that we had a number of fraud management teams dotted around different parts of the business. And these teams were part of a cost function designed to minimize fraud losses for our customers. He decided to consolidate all this expertise in one business, which is now cyber intelligence business, and actually turn it from being a cost function into a revenue generating business, because he had the conviction that this business unit could lead the way in protecting the payment ecosystem from fraud, but also add value to our customers with innovative solutions, and then ultimately differentiating Mastercard's core offerings. In reality, the amalgamation of these disparate teams is not as straightforward as that, right? You can't just bring different people from different parts of the organization and at the get-go have everything running smoothly. So there was an evolution where we moved from teams working in specific verticals of authentication and fraud management and so on, learning to come together and think across different verticals within fraud management. And also in the last few years, we've acquired a few companies. This is a fast-moving part of the business, and we've acquired a company in cybersecurity in the US, a company in behavioral biometrics in Vancouver, an AI company in the Bay Area. So honestly, it's been an exciting environment, and everyone's constantly learning and innovating.
Fantastic. Now, Mastercard is a large company. It's a well-known brand. I feel like everyone would at least have heard of it if they don't know exactly what you guys do. And I'm interested to know whether this paradigm shift has really altered the feel of the organization for you, and whether it's become a little bit fresher because you're doing such new and exciting things.
Yeah, so I joined the business in 2016, so still relatively early days for this particular business unit. And I could immediately sense the excitement, right? The sense of imagine the things that are possible because of this paradigm shift, everyone thinking with a fresh point of view of what they already had in terms of capabilities. And that mood continues to this day, this feeling of, thinking beyond what we have today. Our business deals in the space of fraud, cybersecurity, AI, authentication, identity. So in a way, it is not limited to the realm of our core business as Mastercard, credit, debit, prepaid, and therefore we benchmark not only against our peers in the payment space, not just against the Visas and Amex, the tech field at large. And this then also means that we hire from a lot of, specialist fintechs and startups. And that, plus the fact that we've acquired startups in the last few years, means that there is definitely a startup-y mentality in this part of the organization, which keeps us on our toes, right? It's a nimble organization and working in a dynamic landscape.
Super. Now, when it comes to these sorts of transformations, paradigm shifts, however you want to word it, it's always interesting to me how someone on the outside may experience. So I'm keen to know from you whether the average person who interacts with Mastercard, perhaps one of your customers, how they would notice the things that have changed, or basically the question is, where is this visible apart from to the people in your team?
Yeah, so actually a lot of your viewers have probably interacted with that technology without even realizing that they have. You may not recognize the name cyber intelligence or be able to name any solutions off the top of your head, but you can definitely recognize the chip and pin technology on your card. And that sits in this part of the business.
Right.
Obviously, in recent years, we've evolved that technology to contactless, which is something that has really sort of grown over the period of the pandemic, right? Because nobody wants to touch anything. And contactless is actually a very COVID-friendly technology. Not that we knew that when we were developing it. Other technologies that you've definitely used would be one-time passwords when you place online transactions. That is us as well. And we recognize that it's not an ideal consumer experience that you have to scramble around looking for your phone when you're placing an order online. But it's one way that we are trying to keep you safe. And we are working really, really hard to make that more seamless by, perhaps using biometric authentication and so on. And I want to also call out that these are consumer-facing solutions, but there's a whole host of other solutions behind the scenes are in place to keep you safe from fraud. And you wouldn't realize it, but it works at massive scale and it works really, really quickly and effectively. An example of this would be an AI-powered solution called SafetyNet, which looks at transactions in real time across the breadth of the whole world and continuously generates risk level scores and identifies patterns and anomalies to then reject transactions which look very much like fraud. But at the same time, we know how frustrating it is if you're a consumer in the store trying to place an order and your card gets rejected. So we have to find that balance of reducing fraud loss for our customers, banks, while also keeping the consumer experience as seamless as possible.
And I think for so many organizations, 2020 has really brought forward that awareness to customer experience. And as you say, it's so funny that you should mention the contactless card, because now I'm pretty much, that's all I'm doing, because as you say, you don't want to touch the pin anymore and you just want to tap and walk away. So it's very conscious about that CX experience. And it's interesting what you say, the different things within the paradigm shift has allowed Mastercard to almost be more customer centric and thinking about the customer. And what's this meant for the organization's attitude towards data analytics? Has almost what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from others is that almost customer experience and data analytics are merging a bit more. They're less siloed than they ever have been, because both are realizing they kind of need each other to be successful. Is that something that you're hearing and seeing as well?
No, definitely. We as Mastercard get access to, see so many transactions taking place at a global scale. Everything's in millions and billions. And we're always thinking about how we can leverage insights from this data in a way that is not compromising any consumer privacy, right? The way I say about fraud management is, theoretically, the best way to minimize fraud, keep it to zero fraud loss, is to just reject every transaction, right? That is not the point. And therefore, we have to intelligently find ways to navigate the consumer experience and while minimizing any security risk. An example of this would be digital wallets, right? You can use biometric authentication in a very seamless way. You don't have to key in your password or your PIN and just go ahead and place transactions. And that's the kind of seamless experience that we are trying to recreate in every channel. That said, Mastercard as an organization has a very, very conservative and consumer-centric approach to data and analytics, and never wants to store any, personally identifiable data. I think the insights that we get from data in aggregate is what powers our solutions, and by identifying patterns and so on. And there's a lot more that we can do, and we are working hard towards it by leveraging the power of data and analytics.
Super. Now, time is running away with us. I don't know how we end up going so quickly through these episodes, but I'm keen to look towards the future, which I know is increasingly a harder task to do nowadays. But I'd love to know what is next for Mastercard's cyber and intelligence strategy, and what do you really want to achieve over the next 12 months? What's the big vision?
Yeah, so I think realistically, in the next 12 months, we will still be in the throes of the pandemic in some form or the other, right? Mastercard spans the entire breadth of the globe, so different regions are at different phases of dealing with this pandemic. But inevitably, what is top of mind for us is how do we keep our ecosystem safe, and how do we keep our stakeholders safe in this environment? There has been such a huge spike in cyber attacks, in malware, phishing, social engineering. I mean, literally every avatar of cybercrime has got a shot in the arm from people abruptly switching their lifestyles into fully digital ways of life, right? And it's pretty shocking that even healthcare organizations and research labs working towards COVID vaccine have not been immune to these attacks. And in the next 12 months, that is going to be something that we will focus on. How do we enable our ecosystem? So I'll give you a few examples of what we did in the last few months. So when lockdowns were just announced, there was a rush of chargebacks, right? Consumers were canceling the flights and hotel stays. They were trying to call the merchants to cancel it, and they couldn't get through because everyone suddenly had to work from home, and people were not set up for it. And rather than sort of go through the cancellation process, they often call their card companies to cancel, the banks to cancel the transaction. And that then triggers a chargeback process, which can last many weeks and be a very expensive process for merchants. And we partnered with particularly hard-hit industries like airlines and the hospitality sector to minimize the pain for these merchants by creating this collaboration platform for merchants and banks to talk to each other and have the refunds and credits done in a more seamless way. So it's sort of a win-win-win solution, right? Consumers are happy, banks are happy, merchants are happy. Plus, we have a cybersecurity capability, which we offer for free to hundreds of healthcare organizations and essential services, because again, nobody wants the leading vaccine research to be compromised from cyber attacks. And we are cognizant that the next 12 months, just like the last 12 months, SMEs are the ones who are really at the forefront, bearing the brunt of all the lockdowns. And so we're constantly thinking about, how do we tailor solutions to enable quicker digitization for SMEs and minimizing their exposure to cyber risks as well. And this is not just within cyber intelligence solutions, that's across the breadth of Mastercard that we're constantly thinking about making lives easier for SMEs. So yeah, those are just a handful of initiatives that we have in the pipeline.
Brilliant. Well, I can certainly see what you're saying there about the attacks. It's something that we're seeing in our research as more people are reporting that they have had cyber attacks on their data and different things. And it's certainly a research area that we have looked into and we're continuing to write and create content around. So it's definitely a 2021 issue that's going to stay with us and stay very much at the top of the agenda. Now, Sherene, my final question to you, as you are my first ever Chief of Staff, I'm going to ask you what your advice would be for a new Chief of Staff who's preparing for their first day in the role. What would you say is your piece of advice for them?
Right. I mean, this is a variable role, so I'd say be very flexible. Do as much prep as you can realistically do before getting into the role formally. I personally actually like to read and prepare for things. So I read this book called Chief of Staff, the Strategic Partner Who Will Revolutionize Your Organization by Tyler Paris. And actually, it was a pretty good read. There isn't a lot of literature out there about this role, and I'd recommend this book. in more pragmatic terms, I'd say learn as much as possible about the content, the subject matter in the business, including jargon, acronyms, names of key stakeholders, because once you start on the role, things just move so quickly that you barely have time to interrupt someone and go like, but who is this person? Spend time upfront with your exec to reach a common understanding around ways of working and preferences. Often people at that senior level are pretty set on what they prefer and they don't, and it's better that upfront rather than try to guess along the way. Become best friends with whoever is the most trusted person for that exec. Often it may be the exec assistant who's been with them for like a decade and can predict the reaction of the exec. And I think that's a good tactic. And then lastly, I'll just say what I said at the top of this discussion, which is just communicate. You can't do enough to people at every level of the organization. Obviously, prioritize people in the leadership team to know strategic top of mind issues, but also reach out to people outside your business unit. There are other chiefs of staff, or the CEO, other CEO directs chief of staff. Just keep channels of communication open so that you can reach out when you need to, and they can reach out to you when they need to.
Perfect. There we go. There we have it. Thank you so much, Sherene. It's been a pleasure chatting to you. Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll chat real soon.
No, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's been a pleasure.
There we go, the first ever bod pod with a chief of staff. I think it's really interesting to chat with people who are not in the most traditional data analytics roles to really understand the influence and impact they have on the function. I think it's fair to say Sherene's influence on the translation work that she does between the exec and the wider business, and then of course chatting through that paradigm shift that she has been part of in the cyber functions as well. As always, make sure you subscribe to the Business of Data platform to be first in line for our thought-leading insights. And if you're not already, follow us on LinkedIn to be alerted when we go live and for all of our new content, as well as being able to chat and engage with your peers and colleagues as well. As always, stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you real soon.